7 months into my pregnancy, I accidentally overheard a conversation between my husband and the poor student I had been sponsoring. "Stephen, if your wife finds out that the baby in her womb is actually our fertilized egg, she might get so angry that she'd kill herself, don't you think?" Rosie said, and chuckled softly. "It'd be better if she did. That way, all her assets would be mine," Stephen coldly answered. "The only problem is if she decides to divorce me and kick me out. That's why we need to keep this secret. Once our child inherits her assets, we'll deliver her a crushing blow." That night, I pretended I didn't hear a thing. I gave birth to the child and raised him with utmost care. 24 years later, after my son returned from studying abroad, I transferred all my company's shares and assets to his name. At a press conference, Rosie, the impoverished student before, holding my husband's arm and clutching a maternity test report. She walked straight up to me and declared, "Kian is my biological son. You've been taking him from me all these years. It's time to return him to me now." My son also threw a divorce agreement in my face, his words cold and ruthless. "Hurry up and divorce my dad, so we can finally reunite as a family of 3. Considering you gave birth to and raised me, I'll give you a monthly allowance of $200. I smirked faintly and replied, "All right. Wife, weren't you supposed to attend a board meeting at the company today? Why are you still working in the study?" Stephen walked in with a cup of hot milk, placing it gently in front of me, his voice as tender as ever. I closed my laptop and smiled up at him. "Kian's teacher mentioned he's been coughing a bit lately. I've arranged for him to see the best pediatric specialist tomorrow." Touched, Stephen stroked my hair and said, "You always get so concerned whenever Kian has even the slightest discomfort. When he grows up, he'll definitely repay your kindness with filial devotion." I looked at Stephen and replied matter-of-factly, "Of course. I'm Kian's mother. If I don't look after him, who will?" Moved by my words, Stephen smiled warmly. "You're amazing. Marrying you and raising a child with you has been the greatest blessing of my life." I met his gaze, his eyes filled with affection, and I offered him a faint smile without saying a word. Stephen and I had been together for 10 years, 3 years of dating and 7 years of marriage. During this decade, he had always cared for me when I was sick or tired, surprised me in unexpected ways, and held me tightly during moments of passion, whispering that he would love me forever. Had I not overheard that conversation that day, I would never have believed that the man who claimed to love me so deeply could betray me like this. "Aunt Rosie, you're finally here." Kian's delighted voice suddenly echoed from the living room. I immediately got up and walked out of the study, only to see Rosie stepping through the door. She effortlessly scooped my son into her arms and planted a playful kiss on his cheek. "Baby Kian, did you miss me?" As she spoke, her gaze fell on me, her smile freezing, her expression momentarily unnatural. Before she could say anything, Stephen quickly stepped forward to explain. "Wife, there was a parent-child outdoor activity at Kian's kindergarten today. I figured you'd be busy with work, so I didn't bother you. Asked Rosie to help out instead." Rosie put down Kian and immediately chimed in nervously, Yes, Daphne, you've supported me for so many years. I've always been grateful and wanted to repay your kindness." The moment I got Stephen's call, I rushed right over. Watching her flustered attempts to cover up her guilt, I couldn't help but recall the day my son was born. Rosie had also accompanied Stephen to the hospital under the pretext of visiting the baby, staying by his side as I endured labor. Chapter 2 At that time, Rosie was incredibly excited, pacing back and forth in the hallway, wringing her hands nervously. When she saw that I had given birth to a son, she immediately rushed over, grabbing the baby and refusing to let go. Her eyes were brimming with joy, turning red with excitement. The nurse, unable to hold back a chuckle, teased her. "Who are you to the child? You seem even more excited than the mother." Rosie looked embarrassed, but quickly tried to explain when she noticed I was silent. "Daphne, I couldn't help myself. Kian is just too adorable, and I accidentally gave him a kiss." "You're not mad, are you?" I smiled slightly and responded calmly, "Of course not. I'm so busy with work that I sometimes neglect my family. I'm grateful that you're willing to help take care of Kian. Hearing this, both Rosie and Stephen breathed a sigh of relief. My son then ran up to me, his innocent eyes looking straight into mine as he asked, "Mom, are you going to the office today, or will you go to kindergarten with Dad and me?" I gently patted his head and asked, "What does Kian want Mommy to do?" Without hesitation, he replied, "I want Mommy to go to work, and Aunt Rosie can take Daddy and me to kindergarten." As though afraid Kian would say something inappropriate, Stephen quickly pulled him into his arms and explained to me, "Sweetheart, Kian just doesn't want to distract you from work. Last time, he even told me not to bother you because you're working so hard." Rosie nodded in agreement. Kian is such a considerate child. Only someone as outstanding as you, Daphne, could have such an obedient son. Smiling, I said to my son, "All right, let's do as Kian says." Hearing this, Kian jumped up and down with joy. He completely ignored my presence, grabbing Rosie and Stephen's hands and dragging them outside. Watching their happy little family of three, I allowed myself a faint smile, turned around, and went back to my study to continue my unfinished work. Perhaps they thought I was easy to fool, that I'd never notice anything strange, so Rosie grew bolder by the day. At first, she would sneak around with Stephen while I was at work. But now, even when I was home, she'd find all sorts of excuses to visit. "Daphne, I've been teaching myself how to cook recently. I wanted to make something delicious to thank you for all your help over the years." "Daphne, I just came back from the countryside and brought some local specialties for you." "Daphne, I've quit my job to start a business, but I'm short on startup funds.
Can you help me out?"
Although I knew deep down that Rosie's visits were all excuses to see my son and Stephen, I never refused her. Whenever she came, I always welcomed her politely. I even agreed to all her requests for help. Stephen seemed delighted with this arrangement. Whenever Rosie came over, his lips would curl into an uncontrollable smile. Sometimes, he'd even flirt with her openly in front of me, exchanging knowing glances and secret smiles. Even my son grew more and more attached to Rosie, going so far as to buy her a pair of house slippers so she could visit anytime she wanted. This life continued until my son's college entrance exams. On the day the results were released, Rosie arrived at our house early in the morning to wait with us. When we saw my son's shockingly low score, Stephen furrowed his brows in anger. "How could you score this poorly?" he snapped. My son, however, remained nonchalant. Chapter 3, so what? Our family has money. Mom can just buy me a spot at any school she wants, Kian declared carelessly. Stephen gave me a subtle glance. Seeing that I didn't react, he continued, "Your mom may love you, but she can't indulge you like this. Running the company alone isn't easy for her. You need to show some ambition. How else will you help her or make her feel confident enough to hand the company over to you one day?" Rosie chimed in earnestly. "Kian, your dad is right. Even though Daphne is your mom and will always take care of you, you need to develop your own capabilities. Otherwise, how will you earn the respect of the seasoned executives when you take over the company?" Watching the two of them echo each other, I smiled faintly and said calmly, "It's fine. I've already planned everything for Kian. I'll send him abroad for further studies. Once he's back, he'll naturally take over the company. After all, everything I have is for Kian." Hearing this, the three of them smiled contentedly. I smiled too, but for a different reason. They thought I was naive. I thought they were laughably foolish. During the process of arranging his study abroad, I took my son to the company every day, teaching him the ins and outs of the business without reservation. On the day of his departure, Stephen accompanied him to the airport, gripping his hand tightly, his face filled with reluctance. Rosie also made a special trip, bringing a pile of things for my son, worried about his life in a foreign country. The two of them gave him endless reminders, creating a warm and touching scene, a true depiction of parents' worry when their child travels far away. After my son boarded the plane, they watched it ascend into the sky, their eyes brimming with tears until it disappeared from view. Only then did they leave, reluctantly, with tears still glistening. Once my son left for his studies, Rosie visited our house less frequently, but Stephen began going out more often. Each time he returned, he seemed utterly drained. When I asked about it, he'd claim he was out with friends or had joined a gym to stay fit. On days he ran out of excuses, he'd feign sadness, sighing dramatically. I raised Kian with my own hands. He's never been away from me for this long. I can't help but miss him. If I don't find something to occupy myself, I'll fall apart. Ignoring the lingering scent of Rosie's signature perfume on him, I smiled and reassured him. Kian will be back soon. Then, we can all be together again. Stephen's lips curved into a faint smile, laden with hidden meaning. Yes, soon. Our family of 3 will be reunited. 4 years later, my son returned from studying abroad. Just like old times, Rosie showed up early at my house, accompanying Stephen and me to the airport. The moment they saw my son, Rosie and Stephen couldn't contain themselves, rushing forward to embrace him tightly as if no one else existed. After their emotional reunion, my son walked straight up to me and got straight to the point. Mom, I'm back. When will you hand over the company to me? Seeing his eagerness, I smiled calmly and said, Let's go. I've already arranged a press conference. I'll officially hand everything over to you in front of everyone. At the press conference, the room was packed to capacity. Journalists, prominent figures, and business elites had all gathered to witness the historic moment of the Stellar Sync Group's leadership transition. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, I announced, My son, Kian, will take over as the new president of the Stellar Sync Group. Chapter 4. Under the witness of lawyers and the cameras of the press, I signed the transfer agreement, officially handing over all my assets and company shares to my son. Thunderous applause erupted, and the crowd was abuzz with admiration. Many remarked on the deep bond between mother and son, their eyes filled with envy as they looked at my son. Just then, Rosie arrived fashionably late, arm in arm with Stephen. The room fell silent, confusion and surprise etched onto everyone's faces as Rosie pulled out a paternity test report. With a loud voice, she declared, Daphne, the truth is, the IVF child you gave birth to all those years ago came from my and Stephen's fertilized egg. I am Kian's biological mother. Letting him call you Mom 1 for over 20 years was already repayment enough for carrying him. Now, it's time for you to give him back to me. Her words caused an uproar. Isn't she the impoverished student Daphne always supported? How could she get involved with Daphne's husband and even have Daphne give birth to their child? This is outrageous. It's the classic farmer and the snake story. Daphne helped her so much, and she repays her with betrayal. And the timing? She waited until Daphne transferred the company's shares before making this claim. Clearly, it's about the money. Exactly. It's despicable to exploit someone to bear their child and then steal everything they own. This is pure evil. Amidst the intense condemnation, Stephen spoke up, self-righteous and indignant. For the first half of my life, I was trapped in a marriage. As a man, I kept convincing myself to stay responsible for this relationship. But I'm human too. On countless sleepless nights, I ask myself, is this truly the life I want? Daphne has a good family background and has treated both me and Kian well, but my heart belongs to Rosie. Is it wrong for me to pursue true love? Marriage is meant to bring happiness, and so is divorce. Marriage should not be a shackle that keeps me from my true love. I hope everyone can bless us. His words were delivered with such emotion, as if he were a victim of an unhappy marriage, bravely defying societal norms to seek love. I paid him no mind. Instead, I turned to my son and asked calmly, What do you think about all this? Kian looked carefully at the share transfer agreement in his hand before responding calmly, Mom, this will be the last time I call you that. Although you raised me with care for over 20 years, the fact remains that you are not my biological mother. Blood is thicker than water. I hope you won't stand in the way of our family's reunion. With that, he threw a divorce agreement at my face and said arrogantly, While everyone is here, divorce my dad today and set him free. In light of how well you've treated me over the years, I'll give you $200 a month as alimony. His words sparked outrage among the crowd. No wonder they say like mother, like son. What kind of family is this? Exactly. Everyone knows Daphne always treated her son like a treasure, pampering him for years. And now, the moment she transfers her fortune to him, he turns around and calls someone else mom? $200 a month? That's not even enough for a beggar. How does he have the audacity to say that? I'm an outsider, and even I can't stand this. Daphne, don't pay attention to these ingrates. Exactly. They've gone too far. The crowd rallied behind me, furious on my behalf. Some even offered to help me sue to reclaim my assets. Despite the uproar, Rosie and Stephen remained composed, as if prepared for any scenario. But amidst the crowd's righteous indignation, I smiled faintly and said, "All right." To everyone's shock, I signed the divorce agreement without hesitation. Rosie and Stephen were momentarily stunned, clearly not expecting me to agree so easily. They meticulously examined both the divorce agreement and the share transfer documents. Confirming everything was in order, they finally relaxed and broke into triumphant smiles. Seeing their smug faces, I smiled as well. Since you've given me such a grand surprise, it's only fair I return the favor with a special gift. Stephen frowned, puzzled. A gift? What kind of gift? Everyone else turned their curious eyes toward me. Chapter 5. Under the watchful gaze of the crowd, I took out a finely carved sandalwood box I had prepared in advance. I handed it to Stephen and said earnestly, "This is Walton's family heirloom." I had intended to pass it to Kian as my chosen successor. Even though he doesn't acknowledge me as his mother, in my heart, he will always be my son. I'm giving this heirloom to you as a blessing for your family's harmony and happiness. Stephen's eyes widened, his face filled with disbelief. He hesitated for a moment before cautiously accepting the box and opening it. Inside was a time-worn antique gold lock. The crowd was stunned. It's really the Waltons family heirloom? Has Daphne lost her mind? She's even blessing this pack of ingrates. She must have snapped under the pressure. Who could endure such betrayal from her husband and son? This is too tragic. To love her husband and son so deeply, only to have them take everything and leave her like this. But this is too spineless. Why doesn't she fight back? Exactly. She's the definition of a doormat, giving everything and ending up with nothing. The audience couldn't hide their disdain for me. Rosie clapped her hands mockingly and sneered. Daphne, when you used to sponsor me, I thought you were just a fool with too much money. But today, you've truly impressed me. You're not just a fool. You're the most pitiful doormat I've ever seen. Kian frowned in disgust and said, "Good thing you're not my biological mom. You're an embarrassment." Stephen rolled his eyes, exasperated. Daphne, marrying you was the biggest mistake of my life. From now on, don't tell anyone you know me. I can't afford to be associated with someone like you. With that, Stephen put his arm around Rosie, and, together with my son, they left the press conference without looking back. Unsurprisingly, the incident exploded on social media, and I quickly became the top trending topic. The reporters had live-streamed everything, and people across the country witnessed my humiliation. Netizens were furious on my behalf. Was this woman born desperate for a man? She actually simped for that garbage of a husband. Exactly. They stomped all over her, and she still blessed them? I'm furious. I can't believe how pathetic she is. How could someone tolerate this? Can we stop trending stories this infuriating? My blood pressure can't take it. The internet buzzed with outrage. Some expressed sympathy for me, while others scolded me for being weak. A few well-meaning individuals even reached out, offering to help me monetize my story by live-streaming my tragedy to gain sympathy and recover some losses. Chapter 6. After politely declining all offers of help and advice, I quietly returned home. The moment I stepped inside, I saw Rosie moving her belongings into the house. My things, on the other hand, were being carelessly tossed out like trash by Stephen and Kian. When Stephen noticed me, he lifted his chin arrogantly, looking at me with sheer disdain. Daphne, this house now belongs to Kian and we're divorced. Take your junk and get out of here. Stop interfering with our family reunion. His mask of tenderness and affection was completely gone. All that remained was unabashed loathing, as though he had been enduring my presence for far too long. Kian stood beside him, equally condescending. To live your life and end up like this, you really are a failure. As he spoke, he pulled $200 from his wallet and tossed it on the ground. This is your support for the month. Take the money and leave. Don't dirty our floors on your way out. The respect my son once had for me was now replaced by contempt. I didn't say a word. I calmly picked up the money and my belongings and turned to leave. I moved into a decrepit, abandoned apartment. It was small, dimly lit, and sparsely furnished, but I made it work. Alone, I led a simple and frugal life. My meals were modest, plain porridge with pickled vegetables or steamed buns with hot water. At the end of the month, I had some of the $200 left over. I splurged a little, buying some meat and chili peppers to make a stir-fry. The aroma filled the room, warm and satisfying. Just as I was about to dig in, Stephen and Rosie showed up at my door, bringing Kian along with them. This dump, can anyone actually live here? There's not even a decent spot to hang yourself. A coffin would be bigger than this. Rosie sneered the moment she stepped inside. Stephen wrinkled his nose in disgust. Daphne, you have arms and legs. Why not find a job that offers room and board? You used to be the richest woman in the city, and now you're holed up in this rat nest. Isn't this beneath you? Even the bathroom in our house is bigger than this. How can you stand living here? He asked. I ignored their ridicule and calmly continued eating my stir-fried meat and chili peppers. Kian, noticing the dish, narrowed his eyes and remarked, "Wow, you're eating meat? Looks like giving you $200 a month is way too much." He turned to Rosie, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "We should cut her allowance. She needs to understand how hard it is to earn money these days." Rosie nodded in agreement. My son is absolutely right. Stephen waved dismissively, visibly annoyed. Forget it. $200 doesn't even cover the cost of my socks. Consider it charity, enough to keep her from starving. Otherwise, the online trolls will start attacking us again. Those idiots, he muttered, seething. It's none of their business, yet they keep flooding my inbox with insults as if I desecrated their ancestors' graves. Kian, unfazed by the backlash, chuckled confidently. Don't worry, Dad. I'm about to marry Grace. Once I've secured her family's fortune, we won't need to care about those noisy insects online. From now on, you and Mom can just wait to enjoy your life. Hearing this, Stephen's mood brightened. You're right. Grace is the real deal, a self-made powerhouse. Her influence and wealth surpass even our Greenwood Corp. Son, you're incredible. Better than I ever was. To win over such an accomplished woman is no small feat. The day after I transferred all my assets to my son, they wasted no time renaming Stellar Sync Group to Greenwood Corporation. Chapter 7. My son's name was officially changed from Kian Walton to Kian Greenwood. Under their management, the company began to decline and its market value plummeted. Yet, they seemed unfazed. Their confidence stemmed from Kian's new girlfriend, Grace Montgomery, a rising star in the business world. She was a powerhouse, known for her sharp acumen and decisive actions. Like a blazing comet, she stormed through the corporate landscape, quickly establishing herself as a legend. She didn't just rise through the ranks, she redefined the game, becoming the talk of the entire industry. This newfound connection inflated their arrogance. It was no surprise they had come to mock me again. Rosie shot me a smug glance, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Well, of course. Look whose son he is. I've always taught Kian to have an eye for quality. Ordinary women? They're not worth a second glance. Fortunately, my son is capable, like me. She beamed and latched onto Stephen's arm with one hand and Kian's with the other, exuding smugness. Our family's good days are just beginning. Ha ha. Their laughter filled the room, unbridled and triumphant, as if already basking in a future of limitless wealth and prestige. Listening to their hearty laughter, I quietly finished the last bite of my meal, the faintest smile curling my lips. Yes, I thought. Your good days have only just begun. Soon, the day of Kian and Grace's wedding arrived. The ceremony was set in the city's most extravagant hotel, buzzing with activity. Inside, industry elites mingled, their invitations granting them entry to the grand event. Outside, onlookers gathered, hoping for a glimpse of the spectacle. Even internet influencers had bought overpriced invitations, eager to live-stream the wedding and ride the wave of attention. As cameras captured the lavish decorations and throngs of high-profile guests, the live-stream chats buzzed with activity. This wedding is insane. I can't even dream of something this extravagant. Apparently, Greenwood Corp spent a fortune on this wedding to impress Grace Montgomery. Can you blame them? She's the hottest name in the business world right now, a true self-made powerhouse. Exactly. She's stunning, capable, and brilliant. I can't figure out why she'd marry Kian, though. Everyone knows Kian is just a spineless freeloader. Maybe he's just got incredible luck. First a rich mom, now a rich, powerful wife. Ugh, some people are born with all the luck. It's infuriating. The wedding quickly became the top trending topic online, with more viewers joining by the minute. As the world marveled at the opulence of the event and the who's who of the business elite in attendance, I quietly appeared on the live stream feed. The moment I showed up, the chat exploded. Isn't that Daphne? Didn't she cut ties with the Greenwood family? What's she doing here? Could it be that giving the heirloom wasn't enough? Don't tell me she's here to give another blessing like last time.
No way.
Is she about to pull off another shocking stunt? Unbelievable. How can someone be this much of a doormat? Inside the venue, many guests noticed me and exchanged puzzled glances. Meanwhile, Stephen and Rosie, who had been warmly greeting guests with champagne in hand, froze the moment they saw me. Their smiles stiffened into something closer to grimaces. Chapter 8. Rosie set down her wine glass and strode toward me, her voice sharp and accusatory. Daphne, today is my Kian's wedding day, and every guest here is either wealthy or influential. How did a pauper like you sneak in? Stephen followed with a scowl, barking. Exactly. You're not welcome here.
Get out.
Facing their hostility, I replied calmly. I entered with an official invitation. The two exchanged a glance, doubt flickering in their eyes. At that moment, Kian approached, looking impeccable in his tailored suit but sneering down at me with disdain. Daphne, are you out of your mind? Do you realize how important this wedding is to me? I personally oversaw every single invitation, and you weren't on the list. How dare you claim you entered with an invitation? Have you no shame? Rosie snorted, her mockery dripping with derision. Listening to her talk, I almost believed you actually invited her. Turns out some people are shameless enough to lie in public. Stephen sized me up, his eyes filled with disgust. She's probably starving and snuck in to scrounge a meal. Just look at her. She clearly hasn't had more than a bite of plain rice in ages. Ignoring their mockery, I calmly took out the invitation card from my bag and held it up and revealed, I'm here as a relative of the bride. Kian's expression darkened instantly. Snatching the card from my hand, he scrutinized it closely. When he saw the name on the invitation, Grace's personal invitation, his eyes widened in disbelief. Impossible. Rosie, sensing something amiss, leaned closer. What's wrong, son? Is the invitation real? Did this vile woman forge it? Kian's voice trembled as he shook his head. It's real. A murmur spread through the crowd. Kian turned back to me, his voice demanding and filled with doubt. Tell me, where did you get this invitation? Stephen, trying to rationalize, spoke softly. Kian, after all, Daphne raised you for so many years. Maybe Grace sent her the invitation out of courtesy. But Kian immediately denied it. That's impossible. Grace left all the invitations to me. She personally printed just one special invitation, and she said it was for the most important person in her life. The moment those words left his mouth, Rosie and Stephen's expressions shifted. Even the wedding guests nearby began whispering among themselves. I heard Grace is an orphan. She doesn't have any relatives attending today's wedding. Then how did Daphne get her hands on that invitation? Yeah, wasn't the one special invitation meant for the most important person to Grace? Could it really be Daphne? This wedding just got a whole lot more interesting. Now, all eyes were on me, their gazes filled with curiosity and speculation. The online live stream chat erupted with questions, demanding answers. Stephen, frowning deeply, asked the question everyone was thinking. Daphne, what's your connection to Grace? Why did she give the only special invitation to you? The air grew heavy with anticipation as everyone waited for my answer. But before I could speak, Rosie burst out, her voice shrill and accusatory. I figured it out, she stole it. That invitation has to be stolen. Chapter 9. A pathetic, fallen woman like you has the audacity to know someone like Grace? Rosie seethed. Upon hearing this, Kian nodded, sizing me up with a scornful expression. Indeed, just look at you. Poor and pitiful. You're not even worthy to carry Grace's shoes. Where's the security? He looked around and shouted, Get this crazy woman out of here right now. Don't let her ruin my wedding with Grace. With a single command, the hotel's security swiftly surrounded me. Just as they were about to escort me out, a clear, icy female voice rang out. I dare you to lay a finger on my mother. Everyone turned toward the voice. There, standing in the middle of the hall, was Grace. She was wearing a custom-made wedding gown, her beauty ethereal. Her face was like a lotus flower, her brows delicately shaped, and her presence exuded an unmatched elegance. She seemed to descend from the heavens, mesmerizing everyone with her grace. But it wasn't her beauty that stunned everyone, it was her words. Kian was the first to react. He quickly stepped forward, confused. Grace, why are you calling Daphne Mom? Rosie, trying to salvage the situation, forced a smile and flattered. Yes, Grace, I'm Kian's mother. Daphne is nothing but a fool with money. Oh wait, she doesn't even have money now, just foolishness. Don't make a mistake, dear, she added. Stephen nodded earnestly, adding, Yes, Grace, you may not know our situation well. Daphne did raise Kian, but she has no blood relation to him. You don't need to be kind to her just because of Kian. She doesn't deserve your respect. At their words, the guests in the room suddenly understood. Looks like Grace mistook Daphne for her future mother-in-law, and that's why she sent the wrong invitation. That explains it. I was wondering why Daphne suddenly had a daughter, out of nowhere. Now Daphne is going to be embarrassed. TSK, I can't bear to watch this. The live stream chat exploded, with viewers eagerly awaiting the moment I would finally wake up and stop worshipping Rosie and her family. But in that moment, Grace's face turned cold, her eyes sharp with authority as she glanced at Kian. Then, with all eyes on her, she slowly walked toward me. With a respectful expression, she spoke softly. Mom, thank you for all the years of guidance and nurturing. I once promised to meet you at the peak. I will do everything I can to repay you for the love and care you've given me. Today, I have come to fulfill that promise. At first, when Grace spoke, it could have been seen as a misunderstanding. But with her actions and words now, it was clear. There was no mistake. She had not confused me for anyone else. Everything was deliberate. This time, everyone was truly stunned. The live stream chat flooded with even more questions. Wait, is Daphne really Grace's mother? No way. Hasn't Daphne spent the last 20 years raising someone else's son? How could she suddenly have such a daughter? Exactly. And this daughter is so outstanding. Compared to that useless son, Grace is like heaven and earth. Unbelievable. Daphne has been hiding this for so long. Is the love-struck woman finally striking back? The crowd was in shock. Meanwhile, Stephen, his face turning purple with rage, hissed, So, Daphne, you've really kept this hidden, huh? You acted all devoted to me, and now you have a secret daughter like this. Chapter 10. Rosie was also infuriated and she spat. It's unbelievable. Those clueless internet trolls actually praise you, calling you the most innocent, love-struck fool. In my opinion, you're more disgusting than anyone else. Kian, still seething with anger, chimed in. You really know how to act, huh? You have a daughter with wealth that could rival nations, yet you live in a shabby little house, eating porridge and buns every day. Are you really willing to endure this kind of life just to scam me out of $200 for allowance? How could anyone be as fake and disgusting as you? The three of them, each taking turns, tore into me with insults. But before I could respond, Grace's expression darkened and intoned coldly, You people really have some nerve. My mother gave everything for you. She dedicated decades of her life to you, yet you're not grateful at all. Instead, you bully and slander her. Do you think everyone is as despicable and vile as you? Grace's anger was evident, and Stephen was furious as well. Grateful? Does she deserve it? She's a woman with so much wealth, what good is it? If she just gave all her assets to me earlier, there would have been no problem. Rosie sneered at me, saying, Daphne, have you no shame? If you're upset, why not just say it outright? Using your illegitimate daughter to seduce Kian and turn this wedding into some kind of revenge, what kind of skill is that? Kian shot me a vicious glare and then turned to Grace. Grace, I know you love me, but this time you've really gone too far. You've made me upset. If you sever ties with Daphne now and transfer all your assets to me, I'll consider forgiving you. Kian's words were shocking and audacious. They made me want to laugh. More than that, they made Grace speechless with anger. She looked at Kian coldly and asked, You forgive me? How dare you say that? Don't think I don't know. You're marrying me for my assets. I, Grace Montgomery, am not blind. There's no way I'd ever fall for someone as useless and treacherous as you. Instead of being so full of yourself, you should be thinking about how to save your Greenwood family enterprise. Grace cut to the heart of the matter, speaking the truth without hesitation. Kian's face turned beet red with rage. It was apparent that if it weren't for Grace's influence and power, he would have already thrown a punch. Stephen, on the other hand, stiffened with caution and asked, Grace, what do you mean by that? What do you mean, saving Greenwood Corp? Rosie also looked confused. Exactly. Greenwood Corp is doing fine. What are you talking about saving it? Stop cursing us, she hissed. Seeing how ignorant and arrogant they were, I couldn't help but sneer. You'll find out soon enough. As soon as I finished speaking, Kian received a call from his assistant. Mr. Greenwood, we can't get in touch with any of our suppliers. Our partners are pushing for delivery, but we don't have anything to give them. Kian furrowed his brows, immediately replying, Then go to other channels and get the goods. Pay whatever price is necessary. Just get some goods quickly to avoid a crisis. The assistant's voice was frantic on the other end. We've tried, but no one is willing to sell us anything. All of our channels have been taken over by Grace's people. Chapter 11. The suppliers have all gone to Grace for business, and our accounts are completely empty. Now, Greenwood Corp is facing huge penalties for breach of contract and massive losses. The company is going bankrupt. Before anyone could react, a large group of people suddenly stormed into the hotel. They were creditors, demanding their overdue wages and breach of contract payments. In just a minute, Stephen, Rosie, and Kian went from being billionaires everyone envied to billion-dollar debtors, shouted at and condemned by the crowd. At this point, they finally panicked. Stephen glared at me, shouting furiously, Daphne, you're playing dirty tricks with us? How disgusting can you be? Kian, pinned to the ground by the creditors, screamed at me with all his might, Daphne, you'd better fix this. Otherwise, I'll never forgive you. His words made me laugh. It was clear that I had only fueled his misguided confidence. I looked at him, speaking slowly and clearly. I don't need your forgiveness. If you'd learned something over the years, maybe your company wouldn't be in such deep financial trouble. Kian gritted his teeth and sneered. Daphne, stop pretending to be powerful. Using a bastard daughter to show off, what does that even mean? If you were really capable, would you have handed me all your assets on a silver platter? Slap. Before he could finish, Grace slapped Kian hard across the face. Don't disrespect my mother. I'm not some illegitimate child. My mom adopted me from an orphanage. Over the years, she's loved and raised me without reservation. She helped me climb from nothing to where I am today. Everything I have is thanks to her. The room went silent in shock. So, she's just an adopted daughter. Huh? But Daphne is amazing. She managed to raise her to be so capable just by adopting her. Yeah, and look at Kian, he's nothing but a pile of mud compared to her. Kian furrowed his brows tightly and asked Grace, "Then why did you marry me?" Grace snorted and replied honestly, "Of course, it's so I can have you call all your friends and family to witness the downfall of you ungrateful, white-eyed wolves." Stephen stared at me in disbelief and asked, "Daphne, you've been raising Kian while secretly adopting a daughter to deal with us? Did you already know everything?" I coldly replied, "That's right. I knew when I was 7 months pregnant that the child in my womb was yours and Rosie's." Rosie's eyes widened in shock. "How is that possible? If you knew, why didn't you expose it?" I smiled faintly and said, "Because that would have been too easy for you. I wanted to bring you to the highest point so when you fall, you'll feel the pain more intensely. The higher you climb, the worse your fall will be." My tone was calm, but my words stunned everyone in the room. They now realized I wasn't a fool, but someone who had been playing a long game. Kian collapsed onto the floor, his mind racing in confusion. Rosie and Stephen were both frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Only now did they realize that all the intricate plots they had devised had been transparent to me from the very beginning. The one they had been toying with for years was actually the one in control of their fates all along. As the crowd watched in shock, I turned and left without another word. Grace followed closely behind. Later, it was reported that Rosie and the others sold off all their belongings but still couldn't pay their debts. Eventually, Kian had his organs harvested and was found dead in a remote wilderness. Stephen, on the run from creditors, was forced to jump off a building. On the other hand, Rosie was sold off by someone and disappeared without a trace. As for me, I moved back into my villa. Grace handed me a gold lock that I had once given away. "Mom, I've always wanted to ask you, why did you give your heirloom to those ingrates?" I smiled faintly. "Because this is the Walton family heirloom. Giving it to them only symbolized my determination to reclaim everything."